All right, to this now. Today, we pause to honor the brave men and women of our emergency medical services. National EMS Day is a time to reflect on the critical and often traumatic experiences these first responders face daily, rushing to the scenes of accidents and emergencies, providing life-saving care under immense pressure. To speak more on this, let's now welcome clinical psychologist Dr. Keitumetse Mashego. Dr. Mashego, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. A pleasure to have you on the show again. So we often see emergency medical service personnel as heroes, rushing into danger as first responders, accidents, fires, even violent scenes, but seldom pause to think about just the emotional aftermath. From a psychological perspective, how important is this day, especially, Doctor, when you consider the kind of trauma EMS workers typically face in the line of duty?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Yeah, working with trauma changes you, right? It changes you. It impacts you physically, psychologically, mentally, your personality, even the wiring of the brain is impacted. So this day really is important to emphasize the need to take care of our first line responders, such as your EMS workers, and because it can lead, to such unfortunate situations sometimes where people are on survival mode and it leads to poor coping strategies and it impacts, just how they deal with life because usually debriefing is not prioritized and it can trigger also, other stresses in a person's life. So this day is really important to show the importance of checking in and taking care of our mental health.
Yeah. And how does, repeated exposure to distressing and sometimes fatal incidents affect their mental health over time? I mean, some of these scenes that we're speaking of are very traumatizing when you think of the aftermath of a deadly fire. We saw with the Usindiso building and many others, a multi-vehicle crash with dozens of fatalities. We saw just recently with that bus crash in Limpopo. Devastating floods, KZN, Eastern Cape, I could name more. And of course, COVID-19, where many of these EMS personnel were faced with so much death in hospitals particularly.
Definitely. It can change one, for the worse, sadly, sometimes, where it leads to, people being on survival mode, or even what we call compassion fatigue, where people are exhausted because of attempting to, help in such instances, and what we call also vicarious trauma, where the helpers themselves can develop trauma response, because of seeing such traumatic instances, meaning that they themselves can develop some sort of PTSD symptoms just from, interacting or having to deal with such scenarios on a daily basis. So it can really, lead to really poor coping strategies and also just stress response, whereby people have physical symptoms without a physical cause, meaning that the cardiovascular system is impacted, their sleeping, stress hormones, digestive system. So it can have a holistic negative impact if someone is not self-aware or taking care of themselves because of their work. But working with such trauma definitely has a devastating impact, sometimes leading to mental health challenges that are chronic in people's lives.
Yeah, a little earlier on you mentioned fatigue. I mean, what are some of the early signs of burnout, compassion fatigue even, or even PTS, post-traumatic stress, I mean, that EMS personnel or even their families should be looking out for?
Definitely when someone starts presenting with burnout is where they feel like they have nothing left to give. So it's different to stress in that they really, feel like they are empty, sort of they're pushing an empty car, to a very far destination. So they feel like, that emotional exhaustion is there, and also depersonalization, whereby they've got this negative view of their work, but also they're almost like robots when they go to these scenarios or they deal with the bodies that they have to, tidy up in that scenario as if they are objects. So it's almost like they have an outer body experience when doing this work, but also them just developing poor coping strategies. People are not the same. Some take, it doesn't have to be hardcore drugs. It could be just alcohol or over-the-counter medication just to numb the feelings they might be having. Some it's then just, starting to have this stressful conflict at home where they're not okay. Some is increased sleep, some is decreased sleep, some is eating too much, some is eating too little. Some become withdrawn, some are more outgoing. If it's more just to numb their pain. It's not necessarily that they're having a good time. So it's really those sort of subtle, sometimes very obvious symptoms that can develop physically, but also psychologically as well, where someone is just not coping.
So what can we do? I mean, what role does, society, the public play in helping and assisting in as far as just a mental well-being for first responders?
I think there's still a long way to go when it comes to stigma of seeking help. I think as society, as also a profession, we also still have a long way to go to destigmatize people who struggle with mental health challenges or who are first-hand responders, such as the EMS people. So we really need to be aware that it's okay that they are struggling because they're dealing with abnormal situation on a daily basis. So let's not, judge them for struggling. Let's not judge them if they develop anxiety or sleeping problems or whatever they develop, just to be open and to encourage them to seek help. And also to understand that if you're struggling, it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It just means you're human and you're being, pushing your system, your entire body to, deal with such a trauma on a daily basis. Therefore, you will have a response which is sometimes negative, or it can lead to mental health challenges. So I think it's really just about us encouraging and not judging, and to be kind and to understand that it's not work as usual when people are dealing with trauma on a daily basis, that they really need to actually force them to debrief, because the work that they do will be traumatic. Even I myself as a psychologist need to debrief and seek help because of constantly hearing trauma, right? So for them as well, we really need to encourage them and make it a priority, and actually almost make it mandatory that they do seek that help to debrief.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget that these are just ordinary human beings but doing extraordinary work. But thank you so much, Dr. Mashego. Really do appreciate it. A clinical psychologist, Dr. Keitumetse Mashego, as, of course, we observe EMS Day. I think it's an international day today, also being marked, of course, in South Africa.